Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. These divrei Torah are Ilui Nishmat Haishamat Nechama Mindel Zelma Bat David Alevi. We have a Neshama, some rest in peace, and to you, Leslie, all the family should be convinced for many, many healthy years. Most of you will know that I have a passionate interest in liturgy in the Jewish prayer book.
Really?
Yes. But what you may not know is I also have a very considerable interest in midrash. For a change, Alan knows who sparked my interest in. Well, actually, not in liturgy. My interest in liturgy was sparked many, many, many years ago by Dr. Naftali Vidas, who you didn't know, the Jews College. I first went there, big expert in liturgy. But my interest in Midrash certainly was sparked by Rabbi Dr. Irving Jacobs. And it occurred to me while I was thinking what to talk about for a change, that people don't know what Midrash is. They think they know what Midrash is, but they don't actually know what Midrash is. What is Midrash? This is an interactive program. What is Midrash? How would you describe Midrash? So, okay. I'm really glad, if you say Midrash is stories, it's a bit like saying, what is a wedding banquet? And you say, the wedding banquet, oh, that's potatoes. Well, it's probably true that if you go to a wedding banquet, you'll have potatoes. But you'll also have smoked salmon, you'll have chopped liver, you'll have soup, you'll have salt beef and chicken and as well. So while it's absolutely true. So while it's true that Midrash has stories in it, there is so much more to it that so much more to it than you think. Well, you don't know. And that's why I thought we spend just a few minutes having a look and see what really is Midrash. What does the word come? What's Midrash mean? Darash means to seek, right? Now, from about the Middle Ages, they came up with the idea, they established the idea of four sort of different ways of interpreting the scriptures. There is Pshat. Pshat is simple, plain, straightforward. What you see is what you get. And interestingly, if you've learned quite a lot of Rashi, you'd be surprised to know that Rashi actually is a Pashto. Although Rashi quotes all sorts of other things, he promotes the view that basically will you stop talking while I'm in this? Ridiculous. Oh, not you. Been in school. Basically, like Rashi says, the Mikra is actually read it. What it says, that's what it means. Shut. The next kind of interpretation is called remez. Remez is hints. Hints, for example, a good example of remez is gematria. You know gematria, when each letter has a numerical value, and you know what gematria is, yes? Speak to me. Right? The next one is drush, midrash. The word darash means to investigate, to go into in depth. We'll come back to that in a moment. And the last one is sod. Sod means secret. It's esoteric kind of meaning. Now, if you put pshat, the first letters from pshat, remez, drash, and sod together, you get the word pardes. Pardes is an orchard. So you bring yourself into the orchard of Torah. Now, what is midrash? The word darash means to investigate. It actually is found in the Tanakh. not many times, a couple of occasions. It's found in Chronicles and it's found in Nehemiah. And it refers clearly to interpretation of the text. Midrash is the oldest form of biblical interpretation that we have. Romim were very anxious to try and unlock, as they saw it, all the messages, divine messages that are many of them decoded. They thought of as messages being decoded in the text. And Midrash was a way of trying to unlock what these different messages were. Now, compilations were made of their sayings, their interpretations, and they were made very, very early on. They potentially can go back even before the current era, and they continued well into the Middle Ages. Now, there are essentially two kinds of midrash. There's what is called halachic midrash, which always comes as a surprise to people who don't know. There is halachic midrash, and there is Agadic midrash. The oldest form of midrash that we have is halachic. I'm going to give out some papers. Don't worry, we're not going to learn these. They're just examples, so you can see what I'm talking about. The oldest form of midrash is halachic midrash, and it actually goes right back. It's as ancient, at least, as the Mishnah. So that means it's dated from roughly 200 CE. The midrash and the halachic midrash and Mishnah are much of it is contemporaneous. It was the opposition of the Sadducees to the oral law that encouraged the rabbis to look for scriptural basis for every halakha. And we find halachic midrash in the compilations of them, and they are books. And this is really important because people don't realize this. This is a book of midrash. There's nothing else in here but midrash. Happens to be a book of the midrash on Bamidbar and Devarim. I'll mention that a little while later. Not too late, don't worry, not too far later. A few minutes. But this is only midrash. People think you just find midrash in the Talmud, but you don't. There are books of midrash, lots of books of midrash. And halachic midrash will be books called, for example, the Mechilta, which is midrash not on the whole of Sefer Shemot, but on parts of Shemot. There is a midrash called the Sifra, which is halachic midrash on the book of Vayikra. There's the Sifrei, which are halachic midrash on Bamidbar and Devarim. We also call these Tanaitic midrashim because the rabbis quoted in these midrashim are Tanaim. The Tanaim are the rabbis of the Mishnah. The Amoraim are the rabbis of the Gemara. But the Tanaim are rabbis of the Mishnah, and those rabbis quoted in the Mishnah and in this early, very, very early halakhic midrash are called Tanaim, so they're Tanaitic midrashim. And Gadic midrash is the stuff you're very familiar with. Gadic midrash, I like to describe and think of a Gadic midrash as putting flesh on skeletons. The bare bones of Tanakh very often need explaining. I'll give you a very simple example. Joseph's thrown into a pit. The Torah says, the pit's empty, there's no water in it. So that's it, there's no water in it. But the Midrash comes along, and if you've learned the Rashi on it, you know because Rashi quotes it. Midrash comes along and says, hold on a second, there was water. There was water in it. There was no water in it, but there were other things in it. There were snakes and scorpions. There were snakes and scorpions in this pit. It doesn't say that in the Torah. There's a reason, I'm not going to go into it now because it's subject, but there's a reason why the Midrash tells us that. Wants to tell us what a tzaddik Yosef is. I really always think of this kind of Midrash, what you call stories, as giving us much information that is simply not in the text. Now, the question is, people say, well, is it true? And my answer is it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It's like a rabbi who you will hear time without number telling a story in the middle of his drosha. He may very well have made it up. So it doesn't, why? But it doesn't matter if it's true. He's made it up to illustrate a point. Having said that, this is terribly important, there's huge chunks of the Rabbinic Midrash that we have that if we didn't have them, we actually wouldn't know what was really going on. We wouldn't really understand. So is the Midrash true? Undoubtedly. But undoubtedly, equally, there's a lot of Midrash that is there to make a point, to teach a lesson. Now, where did this stuff come from, which is a difficult question? There's almost sure that much of it comes from what we call the Meturgaman. Meturgaman was a translator. In the ancient synagogue, in Palestine, particularly, where they had a triennial cycle, I think in Babylon too, but it was much more, it must have taken much longer. In Palestine, they had a triennial cycle of reading Torah. In other words, they read approximately a third of what we read each week. So instead of reading the whole of the Seder Bereshit, we read a third. Now, each verse was translated. Somebody stood by the person who was doing the laning, and he translated into Aramaic every single verse. Took a long time. Problem was that some of these Meturgmanim started taking liberties, and they started putting in extra bits of information. That wasn't translation. I don't like the word translation. I don't like the word translation. You cannot translate. Any of you speak any language as well as English, well, no, you can't go from one language to the next literally. You can't do it. There are things if you say, how do you say in Hebrew such and such an expression that you use in English? Well, just look out. Now, in Hebrew, you don't say look out, say tizaher. Tizaher doesn't mean look out. No, sorry, I'll say that again. Tizaher means look out, but it doesn't translate as look out. Tizaher means be careful. So you can't translate literally from one language. I don't like the word translation at all. It's taking one language and saying it how you would say it in another language if it's a good translation. The Meturgamanim started putting in all sorts of extra bits of information. Undoubtedly, some of the stuff they probably made up. There's no question they made it up. The rabbis were very unhappy about this. And we have evidence of this. We have fragmentary midrashim, or not midrashim, they are Aramaic translations, like the Targum Yonatan, for example, not a whole translation of there's only parts of it, but you can see there's the most fantastic stuff in it, if you can understand it. It's very difficult, the Aramaic. But it's just not a literal translation, not intended to be. Now, there are two styles of this kind of Agadic midrash. There's exegetical midrash, and there is homiletic midrash. Exegetical midrash is, you know the word, an exegete, where you explain bit by bit by bit. Rashi's style is exegetical. In other words, he takes what's called an introductory expression, by Yom Hashem, and then he explains it. Then you say El Moshe, and then he explains it. So he breaks a verse up bit by bit by bit and explains it bit at a time. That's exegetical midrash. Sometimes explanations are quite long. Homiletic midrash is very different. Homiletic midrash is sermons. They're sermonettes. And every homiletic midrash has the same style. It starts off with what's called a proemial verse, an introductory verse. It can come from anywhere in Tanakh. Will then follow off with the bulk of the homily of the sermon, and invariably will end with a messianic plea. Look forward to the time of the Mashiach. Now, you've got in front of you three examples of or we just, not trying to say we're not going to go through, obviously. They're not here for us to learn. If you just look at the start, look at the first one. It comes from Devarim Rabbah, and look at the very first word after the introduction. Halakha. This is halachic midrash, and if you look at it, you'll see it is. It looks like a bit of Mishnah almost, and it's midrash. This is halachic midrash. The second part you've got there is homiletic midrash. It starts off with an expression, Hashem tzaddik yivchan, the Lord tries the righteous. It's a pasuk from Tehillim, and his soul hates the evil ones and those who love violence. And then it goes on and gives a whole homily. And the third example you have there is from Ruth Rabbah, from the Midrash to Ruth, and you can see that is exegetical Midrash. So you have three examples here of the different styles of Midrash. There are, for example, compilations of exegetical Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah, Eicha Rabbah. Interesting, the Midrash Rabbah, which is not, the compilation is not old, is 10 different Midrashic works. They are completely different. They have nothing to do with one another. Somebody, we do not know who, somebody took 10 Midrashic books, one on Bereshit, one on Shemot, on the Torah, and the 5 Megillot, and stuck them all together into one compilation. And that was what Midrash Rabbah is. All different things. Some of the Midrashim we have as late as the 12th century. We don't know when the earliest ones, well, we know they came into existence in about the 3rd century. It's very difficult to date this stuff because you have so much of it that is quoted in one source and then quoted in another, one Midrashic work, then quoted in another Midrashic work, and quoted in another Midrashic work. So people took from the other, took from the other, and made compilations. Terribly difficult to actually date this stuff. What is the purpose of Midrash? Well, halakhic Midrash obviously is to understand halakha. The exegetical Midrash wants to, as I explained, get into the bones and put flesh on the bones of the text. And homiletic Midrash, which often contained, and you can see this often contains words of comfort. Jews were living through difficult times. And these homilies were to give comfort. So you have all these different styles of Midrash. It's not just Maisalach. It's not just Bubba Mises. Much of it, as I said before, is true, absolutely true. Much of it is contradictory. You will find a Midrash on one page that says Moses went up the mountain wearing yellow socks. On the other page, he was wearing red socks. It does what? One of each. But it doesn't matter because the rabbi who used the illustration of him using red socks wanted to make a particular point. The rabbi used the illustration of him wearing yellow socks wanted to make a different point. So pardon? Well, it doesn't matter whether he was wearing socks altogether. What matters is what you learn from it. But you must bear in mind, this is terribly important, that much Midrash, I am convinced, is absolutely vital for us to understand the text. Without it, we really wouldn't. Well, there you are, now you know a little bit about Midrash. Have I done 10 minutes? Oh, sorry. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Rabbi Geoffrey, for this very interesting talk on Midrash. Thank you very much to Leslie for sponsoring today's breakfast, and we wish you a long life at the end of the Shloshim. I'm just going to do the bracha achrona. I'll say goodbye to those on Zoom. See you all next week, hopefully.